The darkness of the third facet didn't release me right away. It clung to me like tar, enveloping, pulling, until I felt myself dissolving into it, becoming part of its viscous, pulsating mass. The fall into the fourth facet wasn't just a descent. It was a rupture, as if my soul passed through thousands of glass shards, each one slicing not my body but my very essence, leaving my memories of life in tatters. The air turned sharp, charged with electricity and the smell of burnt plastic, mixed with something alive, damp like sweat, and caustic like chemicals that eat through skin. The wind that lashed at me wasn't just wind. It screeched like millions of voices trapped in a digital cage, their cries merging into white noise that sliced my ears, making my head throb as if it were about to burst. I fell but saw nothing except flashes, red, blue, green, like screens flickering before my eyes until my mind gave in. Time here didn't exist. It fragmented, like code breaking under the weight of an error, speeding up one moment and freezing like a stalled frame the next. I didn't land. I emerged, as if breaking through water, but it wasn't water. It was a liquid, thick as mercury, that coated me, cold and heavy, leaving the taste of metal in my mouth. I found myself in the fourth facet of hell, a place where the sins of the 21st century were punished, an era that began after my time, but whose echoes I felt even in the 1950s, when the world already trembled with new ambitions. This wasn't just a circle of torment. It was a network, woven from technology, lies, destruction, and the thirst for control, ensnaring humanity like a spider's web. The ground beneath my feet wasn't earth, but a platform of black glass, cracked like a screen, with wires protruding from the fissures, sparking and hissing like snakes. The glass didn't reflect me, but millions of faces, flickering as if on fast forward, their eyes empty, their mouths opening in silent screams. Above me hung a vault, but not of stone. It was an endless, flickering screen displaying images. Burning forests, drowned cities, faces twisted with rage, and numbers growing like a tumor. The screen shuddered, spewing static that fell to the ground and turned into pools of mercury, hissing and bubbling like acid. I stepped forward, and the glass cracked beneath my feet, releasing sparks that burned, leaving the sensation of my skin being peeled away by thin blades. The air was thick, saturated with the smell of burnt wiring and blood, and every breath was like swallowing poison that settled in my chest, squeezing it like a vice. Before me stretched a plain, but not an empty one. It was dotted with towers that resembled servers, though their casings were alive, covered in veins that pulsed like arteries, oozing a black liquid that reeked of oil and rot. Hands, legs, and faces protruded from the towers, embedded in the metal, their mouths opening, but instead of screams, they emitted code, zeros, and ones that hung in the air like a swarm of insects, stinging as they burrowed into my non-existent skin. These were the creators of digital empires that enslaved minds, founders of social media, hackers, data manipulators. Their bodies were torn apart, but wouldn't die, wires burrowing into their flesh, draining their energy like parasites, while screens above them displayed their sins. Millions of likes that turned to hatred, fake news that sowed chaos, faces whose lives they shattered with a single click. The towers hummed like a swarm, and each sound was a moan that resonated in my head, splitting it apart. I passed by and reached the edge of a chasm that gaped like a black hole, swallowing light. A hot, acrid wind rose from it, laced with the smell of chemicals and ash that clogged my throat like dry earth. I peered down and saw an ocean, not of water, but of melting plastic, flowing like lava, and in it, those who destroyed the earth for profit were drowning. Their bodies were covered in sores oozing pus mixed with oil, and they flailed, trying to escape, but the plastic clung to them like a living thing, enveloping, pulling them deeper. These were oil and chemical tycoons whose factories poisoned rivers and forests. Their faces were distorted, their skin peeling like paper, their eyes melting, mixing with the plastic that hissed, burning them again. The shadows of animals, extinct birds, fish, beasts, circled above, their silhouettes trembling like a mirage, and each of their cries was a blow that broke the sinner's bones. The ocean churned, spitting up splashes that fell on the shore, leaving smoking pits that reeked of sulfur and death. The chasm gave way to a labyrinth, its walls woven from wires and screens that flickered, displaying the faces of those whose lives were stolen. The wires writhed like snakes, sparking, burning the air that smelled of scorched silicon. At the center of the labyrinth stood pillars, but not of stone. They were made of human bodies fused together, their arms and legs protruding like branches, their mouths opening in silent screams. These were cybercriminals and data traffickers whose networks stole secrets and fates. Their bodies were pierced by needles that injected venom, making their skin swell and burst, releasing black ooze that flowed across the floor like a river. Screens above them showed their victims, people whose lives collapsed due to leaks, blackmail, lies. The wires tightened like a boa, breaking their bones that cracked like dry twigs, but they didn't die. Their eyes opened, staring into the void where their sins flickered. The labyrinth turned into a desert, but not of sand. It was covered in shattered glass that glinted like stars but cut like razors with every step. At the center of the desert stood a massive sphere, forged of metal and glass. But the glass was murky, cracked, and the metal rusted, oozing blood. Inside the sphere burned a fire, not red but white, like lightning, and in it writhed those who manipulated the world from the shadows. These were lobbyists, corrupt politicians whose deals broke nations. Their bodies were bound to chains that sparked like live wires, and the fire licked at them, burning their skin to the bones blackening but not crumbling. The shadows of their victims, workers, refugees, soldiers, stood around, their silhouettes trembling like a mirage, and each of their gazes was a blow that tore the sinners apart from within. The sphere hummed like a generator, and each sound was a moan that sliced the air like a blade. The desert turned into a swamp, where the mud wasn't mud but a mixture of blood, mercury, and screen shards that crunched underfoot like broken glass. At the center of the swamp rose a tower of human bodies, writhing as if alive, their hands reaching upward but unable to break free. These are those who created the cult of consumption, marketers whose ads fueled greed. Their bodies were covered in sores oozing mercury, and worms, long and fat with beady eyes, gnawed at their flesh but didn't kill them. The tower breathed, its surface rising and falling, and each breath released steam that reeked of plastic and blood. I watched as the worms burrowed deeper, and the souls screamed, their mouths filled with shards that cut them from the inside. The swamp gave way to a cave, its walls covered in screens displaying the faces of those whose lives were crushed. The screens flickered, their light harsh like flashes, and each frame was a scream that resonated in my head. At the center of the cave stood a massive cauldron forged of black glass, and in it boiled not water, but a liquid resembling digital code. Zeros and ones that bubbled and hissed, spitting out splashes that burned the walls. In the cauldron were those who created algorithms that enslaved minds, programmers whose codes became chains. Their bodies dissolved in the code, but didn't disappear, their skin peeling like data, their eyes open, staring into the void where their sins flickered. The cauldron hummed like a server, and each sound was a moan that sliced the air like a blade. The cave began to tremble, the walls closing in, releasing steam that smelled of mercury and blood. The screens cracked, and the ground split open, pulling me deeper. The Lord of Hell's voice thundered like an explosion. This is only the fourth facet. I woke drenched in sweat, the taste of metal in my mouth, and the world around me trembled like static on a screen. This is the fourth part of 5. Like and comment if you want to know what the final facet holds, where hell will reveal its heart.